Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee members, thank you very much for providing an opportunity to the Assembly of First Nations to present to you on Bill C-292. As you know, the Assembly of First Nations is the national political organization representing First Nations in every part of the country. On reserve, off reserve, all genders, two genders, I should say. And I'm here this evening to speak in favor of Bill C-292. And I wish to explain my reasons for that perspective, but I would like to give you some context first. The timing of our appearance here this evening is significant. Yes, it is significant because I just come from presentation to the House of Commons Standing Committee on Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development, where I spoke in favor of Bill C-30, an act to establish the Specific Claims Tribunal. And I spoke in favor of that legislation brought forward by the Government of Canada, not only because it is an important step forward for our people, but also because of the process that led to its development. Bill C-30 is the only bill affecting First Nations rights and interests, where this government has engaged First Nations through the Assembly of First Nations in developing the legislation. That process, in our view, is an act of respect. First Nations hold the legal right to be consulted on legislation that directly affects us. The engagement process used to develop Bill C-30 begins to recognize that right, and so we support that legislation without doubt. Respect for our rights is of critical importance. We also support Bill C-292 because, in our view, a deal's a deal. We entered into good faith discussions and agreement with all our federal, provincial, and territorial partners. For the Government of Canada to reach a very public agreement with us, and as such, there is a record of such an agreement, and then to seek ways to undercut that agreement brings dishonour on the Crown. This is a failure of the Government of Canada to engage our people with respect. The elements agreed to in the Kelowna Accord remain unaddressed, and they remain as important to the future First Nations citizens in Canada as they ever were. We need the Government of Canada to recognize the inherent Aboriginal and treaty rights of our people. This government that actually voted against the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, contrary to the 144 states that adopted it, the UN General Assembly, and now its own Parliament, clearly does not respect our rights. To vote against a fundamental international human rights instrument is not only a stain on Canada's human rights record, it is a signal to the international community and the international cooperative processes that in matters affecting Indigenous peoples, the current government does not intend to adhere to international standards and best practices for the human rights of Indigenous peoples. This is even more troubling when internationally and domestic legal and political scholars, experts, and jurists affirm that the United Nations Declaration on Indigenous Peoples does not contravene the Canadian Constitution, and in fact respects the rule of law and bolsters the principles, values, and rights contained therein. In this regard, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Parliament for passing the motion to implement the UN Declaration, and I would urge senators to follow the lead of the lower house. I also call your attention that at this moment there is a regional process taking place to draft a Declaration of Rights for Indigenous Peoples for the Inter-American Human Rights System. The Organization of American States is a vital regional agency committed to the purposes and principles of the United Nations. The UAS is drafting a human rights instrument to protect the rights of Indigenous peoples of the North and South American continent and small island states of this region. I regret to report that the Government of Canada has refused to join other nations in accepting the UN Declaration text as the starting point or minimum outcome for a draft American declaration. In fact, while time does not permit me here to explain more fully the actions and positions of Canada at the UAS would severely undermine the principle of international cooperation that is a crucial element of the United Nations Charter and the UAS Charter. We simply need better cooperation. We need the Government of Canada to reconcile itself with the First Peoples of this land. We need the Government of Canada to simply respect the rule of law. Governments across Canada fail continuously in their duty to consult with First Nations on decisions that affect our rights. Canada must consult with us on the development of legislation that affects us and on decisions that affect resources on our lands and our traditional territories. This is the law. Failure to meet that duty can be seen by many as a lack of respect for the rule of law. Its consequence can be seen in points of conflict across the country. The actions that have resulted in the jailing of First Nations leaders are a direct result in response to the disrespect for the rule of law that governments demonstrate whenever they assign resource development rights on our lands and territories without first having met their duty to consult and accommodate First Nations rights and interests as required by the laws of Canada. And when I speak about better cooperation and when I speak about trust and honoring commitments, I speak to two important issues that would suggest to me that trust and political goodwill and commitments made are not being honored. And here I'm referring to the promised apology to our people for the tragic and sad chapter of the residential school experience and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We signed a political agreement on May the 30th, 2005 that set out the basis for the negotiations that took place that led to the agreement in principle and then the formal adoption of the residential school settlement agreement. In that political agreement, there was a commitment that the Government of Canada would engage the Assembly of First Nations in writing the language of the apology that was promised us in the speech from the throne in October, including sitting down with the government to figure out together the appropriate place for this very significant moment in Canadian history. And to this date, we have not had any formal discussions with the federal government consistent with the political agreement. We are now hearing rumors that the apology will be presented to the nation on either May the 21st or the 23rd. I would remind the members here the worst thing that could happen with the apology is that is if the government was to apologize to us and the apology was rejected. And we don't want to see that as the outcome. We would urge the government to actually honor the commitment outlined in the political agreement of May the 30th, 2005. We want to be engaged. We want to do right. We want this apology to be of great significance to not just the survivors of the residential school experience, but to the entire country. And indeed, we want to speak to the world on this matter. It's an opportunity for Canada to present itself as a country that truly believes in the First Peoples of the land, and all of the injustices and harms that have been inflicted on our people are accepted for what they are, and that the country, through its government, is prepared to apologize to our people.